Hey everyone, before we dive deep tonight, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of content. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to connect with all of you across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and settle in. Tonight, we're going on a journey through the oldest written records of human civilization, back to when the gods walked among mortals, when kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, and when beings from the heavens descended to teach humanity the secrets of civilization. We're exploring what the ancient Sumerian texts reveal about the world before the Watchers came to Earth. Long before the Book of Enoch spoke of fallen angels descending upon Mount Hermon, long before Genesis recorded the sons of God taking human wives, there existed older stories carved in cuneiform on clay tablets in the cities of ancient Mesopotamia, stories that described a world before our world, an age when divine beings mingled freely with humanity, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were not yet firmly drawn. Picture the landscape where these stories originated. Southern Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. A flat alluvial plain where water was both blessing and curse, bringing life-giving silt during the annual floods, but also threatening to destroy everything humanity had built. This was the cradle of civilization, where the first cities rose from the marshlands sometime around 5000 BCE, where writing was invented around 3200 BCE, where the wheel first turned, where mathematics and astronomy first developed into formal sciences that would shape human understanding for millennia to come. The Sumerians who inhabited this land were unlike any people who had come before them in the archaeological record. They built monumental temples called ziggurats that reached toward heaven, stepped pyramids of mud brick that dominated the flat landscape for miles in every direction, some rising over 100 feet into the desert sky. The White Temple at Uruk, built around 3100 BCE, sat atop a massive platform visible from the surrounding countryside, a beacon announcing human ambition and divine presence. They developed complex irrigation systems that transformed desert into farmland, channels and canals that brought water from the great rivers to fields that would otherwise have been barren wasteland. Archaeological evidence shows irrigation networks extending for miles, requiring coordinated labour from thousands of workers, managed by bureaucratic systems that tracked water distribution with written records. This wasn't primitive agriculture, but sophisticated hydraulic engineering that supported dense urban populations. They created the first known writing system using wedge-shaped marks, pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus to record everything from temple receipts to cosmic mythology, from grain distributions to the deeds of gods and kings. The earliest texts from around 3200 BCE were simple accounting records, tallies of goods and livestock. But within a few centuries, Sumerian scribes were composing complex literary works, legal codes, mathematical tables, astronomical observations, medical texts, and the mythological narratives we'll explore tonight. They organized themselves into city-states, each with its own patron deity, its own king, its own identity and ambitions. Eridu, founded around 5400 BCE according to archaeological stratigraphy, sacred to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Ur, devoted to Nanna, the moon god, whose ziggurat still stands partially reconstructed in modern Iraq. Uruk, where Inanna, the goddess of love and war, held sway, whose legendary king Gilgamesh would become the subject of humanity's oldest epic, narrative. Nippur, where Enlil, the king of the gods, had his primary temple, which served as a religious centre for all of Sumer even when political power shifted elsewhere. These cities competed for resources, for agricultural land, for control of trade routes, for prestige, for the favour of the gods. Wars between city-states were common, with victories commemorated in royal inscriptions and defeats lamented in literary compositions. The Standard of Ur, a decorated box from around 2600 BCE, depicts both war and peace, showing us Sumerian soldiers marching to battle and then celebrating victory at a banquet, all rendered in intricate shell and lapis lazuli inlay. Yet despite their rivalries, these cities also shared a common culture, a common language, and common stories about where everything came from, what it all meant, and where it was all heading. They shared religious festivals, literary traditions, legal concepts, mathematical systems, and mythological narratives. A scribe trained in Ur could read texts from Nippur. A merchant from Uruk could do business in Eridu. The Sumerian cultural sphere was unified even when politically fragmented. The Sumerians didn't see themselves as the beginning of everything. They weren't so arrogant as to imagine they represented the first flowering of human civilization or the origin point of all knowledge and culture. Rather, they looked back to an even more ancient past, to a time before their time, to an age they called the antediluvian period, literally before the flood, the time before the great deluge that destroyed the old world and required everything to begin again. They preserved memories of this primordial age in texts that would be copied and recopied for thousands of years, passed down through generations of scribes, translated from Sumerian into Akkadian and Babylonian. As political power shifted, but cultural continuity remained, studied by students in temple schools called adubus, where young men learned to read and write cuneiform, referenced in rituals and incantations that invoked ancient powers and ancient knowledge, cited in royal inscriptions that claimed continuity with the distant past to legitimize present authority. These texts speak of a world utterly different from our own, so different that even the basic parameters of existence don't match what we take for granted. A world where the lifespans of rulers stretched into tens of thousands of years, where a single king might reign longer than all of recorded human history in our modern reckoning, where time itself seemed to operate on a different scale, where the aging process was either much slower or measured by different standards than what we know, where divine beings called the Anunnaki decreed the fates of humanity from their celestial assembly, gathering in council to decide matters of cosmic importance, deliberating about the structure of reality, determining what would be and what wouldn't be, exercising authority over both gods and mortals. These weren't distant, transcendent deities, but active, involved powers who cared deeply about what happened on Earth because they depended on humanity for their sustenance through sacrifices and offerings. Where 7 sages emerged from the cosmic ocean to teach the arts of civilization, fish-garbed beings called the Apkallu, who walked on land during the day to instruct humanity in everything from writing to metalworking, from agriculture to astronomy, from law to divination, and then returned to the waters each night, maintaining their connection to the primordial deep from which all wisdom flows. These weren't human teachers, but semi-divine culture-bearers, intermediaries between gods and mortals who crossed boundaries to transmit knowledge that would transform human existence. Where the first cities were founded not by human ambition or accident, but by divine command when kingship itself descended from heaven as a gift from the gods, an institution created in the celestial realm and then transferred to earth to organize human society according to divine patterns. The very concept of civilization, according to Sumerian thought, wasn't a human invention, but a divine revelation, something given rather than developed, transmitted from above rather than emerging from below, where the boundaries between heaven, earth, and the underworld were more permeable than they would later become, where communication between realms was possible and even routine for certain figures, where divine beings could manifest on earth in visible, tangible form, and humans might, in rare cases, ascend to heaven while still alive, crossing the boundary that normally separates mortal from divine, finite from infinite, temporal from eternal. This was the world before the Watchers, according to the testimony of humanity's oldest written records. A world both more wondrous and more terrifying than our own, where the presence of the divine was immediate and tangible rather than distant and abstract, where the natural and supernatural weren't separate categories, but different aspects of a unified cosmos, where what happened on Earth reflected and affected what transpired in heaven, creating a web of interconnection between realms that modern secular consciousness can barely imagine. Tonight, we're going to piece together what these fragmentary texts tell us about that primordial age. We'll examine clay tablets discovered in the ruins of ancient libraries, some dating back nearly 4,000 years, excavated from beneath meters of accumulated sand and debris in what are now the deserts of Iraq, pulled from tells, artificial hills created by successive occupation layers, where archaeologists have been working since the 19th century to recover these ancient voices. The discovery of these texts is itself a remarkable story. In 1849, British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating at Nineveh when he uncovered the library of King Ashurbanipal, who ruled Assyria in the 7th century BCE. This library contained over 20,000 clay tablets and fragments, including multiple copies of ancient Mesopotamian myths, epics, and historical texts. Among them was the most complete version of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic we'll examine in detail tonight. In 1893, an expedition from the University of Pennsylvania, led by John Punnett Peters, excavated at Nippur, the religious center of ancient Sumer. There, in the ruins of temples and private houses, they found thousands of tablets, including copies of the Sumerian king list, the Eridu Genesis, and numerous other literary and religious texts. The tablet containing the Sumerian flood story was recognized by scholar Arno Pobel in 1912, though it had been sitting in a museum storage room for nearly 2 decades before someone realized what they had. Throughout the 20th century, more tablets were discovered at sites across Iraq and Syria. At Uruk, archaeologists found the earliest written texts, simple accounting records that showed writing's practical origins before it was adapted for literature. At Mari on the Euphrates, French excavators uncovered thousands of administrative texts and letters that illuminated daily life in ancient Mesopotamia. At Ebla in Syria, Italian archaeologists discovered a massive archive that included the oldest known bilingual dictionaries, helping scholars understand Sumerian and its relationship to other ancient languages. We'll translate the wedge-shaped cuneiform signs that preserve these ancient memories, signs that represent not just sounds but complex ideas, divine names, cosmic concepts. Cuneiform wasn't alphabetic but logographic and syllabic, using hundreds of signs that could represent whole words, syllables, or phonetic elements depending on context. Learning to read cuneiform required years of training in ancient times and still requires extensive study today. Modern scholars spend lifetimes mastering the languages, grammar, vocabulary, and interpretive challenges these texts present. We'll reconstruct narratives from broken pieces, filling gaps where we can with parallel versions and later retellings, comparing multiple manuscripts to arrive at the most complete understanding possible. Most clay tablets have survived only partially intact. They were buried, broken, scattered, sometimes deliberately destroyed, weathered by millennia. When excavators find them, they're often fragmentary, with crucial passages missing, requiring careful detective work to reconstruct. For instance, the Sumerian flood story exists primarily on one badly damaged tablet from Nippur. Large sections are missing, entire columns lost. Scholars fill these gaps by referring to the later Akkadian version in Atrahasis, which tells the same story with more detail, and by comparing with the flood episode in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which represents yet another version of the tradition. By triangulating between multiple sources from different periods and places, scholars build composite texts that represent our best understanding of what the original might have said. We'll work like detectives, assembling evidence from scattered sources, following clues across thousands of years and hundreds of miles, piecing together a picture of a world that existed before anything we would recognize as history in the modern sense. Archaeological stratigraphy gives us relative chronology, showing which layers are older and which newer. Radiocarbon dating provides absolute dates for organic materials. Pottery typology tracks cultural changes. Architectural remains show how cities developed. But the texts themselves give us access to how ancient people understood their world, what they believed about origins and meanings and purposes. Our journey will take us through multiple layers of ancient Mesopotamian thought and tradition. We'll begin with the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that describes how the cosmos itself came into being from primordial chaos, how the gods were born from the mingling of fresh and salt waters, how Marduk defeated Tiamat and created the world from her corpse, how humanity was fashioned from divine blood and clay. This text, composed no later than the early 2nd millennium BCE, based on linguistic and historical evidence, and possibly much earlier if oral traditions preceded the written version, gives us the cosmological framework within which everything else occurs. The Enuma Elish exists in multiple manuscript copies, the most complete being a later Syrian version from Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh, but fragments from earlier periods show the tradition was already old by the time of that 7th century BCE copy. The text is written on 7 clay tablets, each containing between 115 and 170 lines of verse, organized in poetic form with regular meter and repetition, designed for ritual recitation during the Akitu festival, the Babylonian New Year celebration that took place annually in spring. We'll explore the Eridu Genesis, the oldest known flood narrative, which tells us why the gods decided to destroy their own creation, what led to the decision to send the Great Deluge, and how one righteous man was warned and saved. This text, fragmentary though it is, preserves memories older than anything in the biblical tradition, reaching back to the very dawn of Sumerian civilization, to a time when Eridu was the primary city, before Uruk rose to prominence, before Ur became a major power. The Eridu Genesis survives primarily on one Nippur tablet dating to the Old Babylonian period, around 1700 BCE, but the content is clearly much older, reflecting traditions from the early dynastic period or even earlier. The tablet is badly damaged with perhaps 2/3 of the original text now lost, but what remains gives us crucial information about Sumerian concepts of creation, the purpose of humanity, the establishment of cities, and the flood that destroyed the antediluvian world. We'll examine the Sumerian king list with its impossibly long-reigned monarchs who ruled before the waters swept everything away, 8 kings in 5 cities who together governed for more than 240,000 years, according to the Sumerian sexagesimal counting system. We'll consider what these astronomical numbers might mean, whether they're literal records of actual reign lengths, symbolic representations of dynastic periods, mathematical encodings of astronomical cycles, or mythological expressions of the vast antiquity of the antediluvian age. The Sumerian king list exists in multiple versions, the most complete being the Weld Blundell prism, an 8-inch tall clay prism with 4 sides, each containing 2 columns of text discovered in Iraq in 1922 and now housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. This version was composed around 2020 BCE during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, representing an attempt by that dynasty to legitimize its rule by connecting it to the kingship that descended from heaven at the beginning of time. We'll meet the Apkallu, those mysterious fish-garbed sages who taught humanity everything from writing to magic, from agriculture to astronomy, from medicine to divination. We'll explore who they were according to the texts that mention them, where they came from, the Abzu, the cosmic freshwater ocean beneath the earth, what they taught, the me, the fundamental principles of civilization, and what ultimately happened to them. Banishment by Marduk back to the Abzu, prohibited from returning to Earth. We'll examine the striking parallels between these Mesopotamian culture heroes and the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, looking for connections and influences across different traditions. The Apkallu traditions are attested in text from the 3rd millennium BCE onward, while the Book of Enoch in its current form dates to the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE, suggesting over 2,000 years of tradition development and potential cross-cultural influence during the Babylonian exile, when Jews lived in Mesopotamia and were exposed to these stories. We'll delve into the Atrahasis epic, another flood narrative that gives us crucial information about why humanity was created, to relieve the gods of agricultural labour, what role we were meant to play in the cosmic order, servants who provide offerings and maintain temples, and why the gods eventually regretted making us. We became too numerous and too noisy. This text provides psychological and theological depth to the flood story that enriches our understanding of the entire tradition. Atrahasis survives in multiple copies from different periods, the most complete being an Old Babylonian version from around 1700 BCE. The text is organized in 3 tablets, telling the story of creation, early human history, and the flood in a coherent narrative arc. The name Atrahasis means exceedingly wise, and refers to the flood hero who, through cleverness and devotion to the god Enki, manages to survive when the other gods decree humanity's destruction. And crucially, we'll trace the connections between these Mesopotamian traditions and the later texts that speak of watchers, fallen angels, and the Nephilim giants. Because these stories don't exist in isolation, floating in some cultural vacuum. They're part of a larger conversation that echoed across the ancient Near East for thousands of years, influencing Hebrew scriptures as they developed, shaping Jewish apocalyptic literature as it emerged in the Hellenistic period, and even impacting early Christian understandings of the primordial past and the origin of evil. We'll see how the Apkallu traditions might have influenced the development of the Watchers narrative, providing a template for understanding divine beings who descend to Earth, teach forbidden knowledge, and face judgment. How the antediluvian kings of Sumer relate to the long-lived patriarchs of Genesis, with both traditions preserving memory of a time when human lifespans were dramatically longer than current experience. How the Mesopotamian flood story shaped the biblical account, with Genesis preserving the same basic narrative structure while transforming the theological meaning. And how all of these traditions preserve what appears to be ancient memory of some kind, memory of a time when the world was different, when divine and human interacted more directly, when the foundations of civilization were being laid, when something went catastrophically wrong that required the world to be destroyed and rebuilt. Whether this memory has any historical basis, what exactly it might be remembering, and how we should interpret it today, these questions don't have simple answers, but exploring them will deepen our understanding of how ancient peoples understood their place in the cosmos. But before we can understand what happened when the Watchers descended, we need to understand the world into which they descended. We need to know the cosmology, the structure of reality as the Mesopotamians conceived it, the divine hierarchy, who the gods were and what roles they played, the nature of humanity, why we exist, and what purpose we serve, the structure of civilization, how cities were founded and organized. We need to see the framework that was already in place, the stage upon which the drama of the Watchers would unfold. So let us begin at the beginning, or rather before the beginning, because Mesopotamian cosmogony starts not with creation but with pre-creation, with the state that existed before anything was made or named or organized. Let us journey back to a time when nothing yet had a name, when the cosmos existed in a state of formless potentiality, when all that would become heaven and earth and everything in between lay dormant in the primordial waters, waiting to emerge into manifestation. The Enuma Elish, our primary source for Babylonian cosmogony, opens with words that have echoed through millennia, words that were recited annually during the New Year festival, words that every educated person in Mesopotamia would have known, words that painted a picture of the cosmos before creation. The opening lines, in a literal translation from the Akkadian, read, When on high, the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name, naught but primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mumutiamat, she who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body. Let's unpack this carefully, because every word matters. When on high the heaven had not been named doesn't just mean the sky didn't exist. In Mesopotamian thought, naming was the act that brought things into real existence. The Egyptians had a similar concept, Ma'at, the speaking of something into being. For the Babylonians, the unmanifest became manifest through naming. So when heaven had no name, it meant heaven didn't exist as a distinct entity, as a separate realm, as something differentiated from the general chaos. Firm ground below had not been called by name similarly indicates that Earth didn't exist yet as a separate, solid, distinct realm. There was no up and down, no above and below, no separation between realms. Everything existed in an undifferentiated state of potentiality, the cosmic equivalent of the physicist's quantum foam before the Big Bang, where all possibilities exist but nothing is actualized. Naught but primordial Apsu, their begetter, introduces us to the first primordial entity. Apsu represents fresh water, specifically the underground freshwater ocean that the Mesopotamians believed existed beneath the earth. This wasn't just mythology but reflected their actual experience. When you dig wells in Mesopotamia, you eventually hit water tables, underground aquifers. They conceptualized this as a vast ocean beneath the earth's crust and personified it as the god Apsu. And Mumutiamat, she who bore them all, introduces the second primordial entity. Tiamat represents salt water, the seas, but more fundamentally she embodies primordial chaos, the formless potential from which form would emerge. Her name is related to the Hebrew word tehom, the deep, which appears in Genesis when the Spirit of God hovers over the face of the deep before creation begins. This suggests common Semitic roots for these cosmological concepts. Their waters commingling as a single body gives us the cosmological starting point. Before separation, before differentiation, before creation, there was only the eternal mingling of fresh and salt waters, Apsu and Tiamat in eternal embrace, their waters mixing without boundary, without distinction, without form. This is the primordial chaos, the formless void, the cosmic womb from which everything would eventually emerge. The text continues, emphasizing what didn't exist in this pre-creation state. No reed hut had been matted. No marshland had appeared. When no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined. Reeds and marshlands were fundamental to Sumerian ecology, the environment where civilization first developed. Their absence here emphasizes how totally uncreated the cosmos was. Even the gods didn't exist yet, hadn't been named, had no destinies decreed for them. This is the universe in its original state. Before differentiation, before manifestation, before anything existed as a discrete entity. No sky above, no earth below, no gods, no mortals, no light, no darkness, no time, no space. Only the eternal mingling of two primordial waters, Apsu and Tiamat, fresh and salt, male and female, the fundamental polarity from which everything would emerge, through a process of increasing differentiation and organization. The text describes them lying together, their waters mixing, but nothing yet formed. This state could have continued eternally. There was no necessity forcing change, no clock ticking down to creation. The primordial state was stable, self-sufficient, requiring nothing, producing nothing, simply existing in eternal sameness. But then something shifted. The text doesn't explain why or how, presenting it as a spontaneous emergence rather than a caused event. Within the mingling of Apsu and Tiamat, within the formless potentiality, something began to take shape. The first gods were born, emerging from the waters like islands rising from the sea, like thought emerging from undifferentiated consciousness, like pattern forming spontaneously in chaos. Lahmu and Lahamu appeared first, twin deities whose names are difficult to translate precisely, but seem to mean something like the muddy ones or the hairy ones. Ancient commentaries on Enuma Elish identify them with the powers in silt, the first solid matter emerging from the liquid chaos. This makes ecological sense for Mesopotamia, where the land itself is created by silt deposits from the rivers. The twins Lahmu and Lahamu represent the first actualization of matter, the first solidification from the waters. The text tells us, then Lahmu and Lahamu were brought into being, called by name. Age they attained became tall. They grew, developed, aged, though what aging means for immortal beings is unclear, and reached maturity. They represented stability, the first break from absolute fluidity, the first step toward form. After them came Ansha and Kisha, whose names mean whole heaven and whole earth. But heaven and earth weren't yet separate, so these deities represented the totality of what would become the upper and lower realms, the full extent of manifest reality, though still undifferentiated. The text describes them. Anshar and Kisha were brought into being, surpassing them. They prolong their days, added unto their years. The language emphasizes generational progression. Each new generation is greater, more developed, more powerful than the last. This is evolution, emergence, increasing complexity arising from simplicity, the cosmic equivalent of biological development, where single cells become multicellular organisms, become complex creatures. The gods are developing, reality is developing, form is emerging from formlessness through successive stages. Ansha and Kisha produced Anu, the sky god, who would become the head of the divine pantheon in early Sumerian tradition, though later Enlil would take over that role, and eventually Marduk would become supreme. The text emphasizes Anu's excellence. Ansha made his firstborn Anu equal to himself. Anu begot in his image Nudimud, Ie. Each generation not only equals but potentially surpasses the previous one, a reversal of the common ancient, pattern where the earliest ages were golden and everything since represents decline. Anu in turn produced Ea, also known as Enki in Sumerian, who would play a crucial role in everything that followed. The text lavishes praise on Ea. Ea, the all-wise, he created, surpassing in wisdom. He was superior to all his forebears, had no rival among the gods, his brothers. Ea is described in terms of surpassing intelligence and cunning, foreshadowing his role as the clever god who finds solutions to impossible problems, who subverts expected outcomes through wit and guile. Ea was the god of fresh water, but this meant more than just rivers and springs. He was associated with the Abzu, the cosmic freshwater ocean beneath the earth, the same Abzu that was originally the name of the primordial father. This identification would become literal after Ea defeated and replaced Apsu, making the father's body his own dwelling place, a pattern of usurpation and replacement that runs through the text. As more gods were born, filling out the pantheon, they began to move, to speak, to act. And this brought noise, commotion, disturbance to the primordial silence that had characterized the eternal mingling of the waters. The younger gods were active, creative, exuberant, busy. They made plans, held councils, engaged in divine activities that shattered the eternal quiet that Apsu and Tiamat had known. The text tells us, the divine brothers banded together, their clamour reverberated, they disturbed Tiamat. They were harassing the insides of Tiamat. The gods moved about restlessly in the Anderuna. The Anderuna seems to be some kind of cosmic space within Tiamat's body, where the younger gods dwelt, and their movement there was disturbing to her, like unborn children kicking in the womb, except these children were gods who would eventually slay their mother. Apsu found this intolerable. He was accustomed to eternal silence, to the peaceful existence of the primordial state before creation. The noise of the younger gods prevented him from enjoying what he had always known. The text records his complaint. By day I cannot rest, by night I cannot sleep. I will abolish their ways and disperse them. Let peace prevail so that we can sleep. This is a remarkable motivation for cosmic conflict. Apsu doesn't object to the younger gods on moral grounds, doesn't claim they're evil or rebellious or violating any law. He simply can't sleep because they're too noisy. This practical, almost petty motivation humanizes the gods in a way that later monotheistic traditions would avoid. The Babylonian gods weren't transcendent, omnipotent, infinite beings beyond all limitation. They had needs, vulnerabilities, annoyances. They required rest, and when they couldn't get it, they became irritable and destructive. Apsu discussed his plan with his vizier Mumu, who enthusiastically agreed. The younger gods needed to be silenced, destroyed, so the original tranquility could be restored. Together they plotted how to accomplish this, planning genocide against their own offspring, patricide in reverse. But Tiamat initially resisted this plan. The text presents her speech. How shall we destroy what we ourselves have brought into being? Though their ways are indeed grievous, we should bear it in good spirit. This is a mother's love, unwilling to harm her offspring even when they cause her discomfort. She recognizes the problem but rejects the solution, preferring to endure disturbance rather than destroy her children. This detail is important because it shows Tiamat isn't initially the chaos monster, the enemy of order, the destructive force that must be defeated. In the beginning, she's protective, nurturing, unwilling to harm even troublesome children. Her later transformation into the enemy comes only after Apsu is killed, and she's urged to vengeance. The text wants us to understand that the cosmic conflict wasn't inevitable, that it arose from specific choices and actions, that things could have gone differently. But Apsu wouldn't be dissuaded. He had made his decision, counselled by Mummu, who also preferred the old silence to the new noise. They plotted together to destroy the younger gods, to silence them forever, to return the cosmos to its original state of undisturbed tranquility. The decision was made, the plan was formed, the destruction seemed certain. The gods, however, learned of the plot. How they discovered it the text doesn't say, but knowledge spread among them that their lives were in danger, that their very existence was threatened. Fear spread through the divine assembly. How could they resist their progenitor, the primordial father from whose waters they had emerged? How could they fight against the very source of their existence? They were paralyzed by the impossibility of the situation, facing what seemed like certain destruction. But Ea, cleverest of the clever, craftiest of the crafty, refused to accept this fate. Using his superior wisdom, his association with magic and secret knowledge, he devised a plan to counter Apsu's plot. The text describes his strategy. The all-wise Ea perceived their plot. He designed against it the configuration of the universe, made artful his spell against it, surpassing and holy. This passage is dense with meaning. Ea designed the configuration of the universe, suggesting he was working with the fundamental structure of reality itself, manipulating cosmic principles rather than just using conventional weapons or force. He made artful his spell, indicating magical means, working with words and power rather than physical strength. The spell was surpassing and holy, superior to anything that had existed before, representing a new level of divine power. Ea recited this spell over the waters of Apsu, and it worked perfectly. The text tells us he recited it and made it subsist in the deep, poured sleep upon him so that he was utterly lulled. The spell induced a deep, unnatural sleep in both Apsu and his vizier Mummu, rendering them powerless, unaware, vulnerable to whatever Ea might do to them while they slumbered. While they slept, Ea acted swiftly and decisively. This was patricide, the murder of the father by the son, one of the most fundamental transgressions imaginable in any culture, violating the most basic bonds of kinship and authority. Yet Ea didn't hesitate. He recognized that this was necessary for survival, that the old order represented by Apsu had to be overthrown for the new order to exist. The text describes the deed without flinching. He tore off his crown, took away his aura, he slew Apsu, killed him in his dwelling, he bound Mummu, held him by the nose rope. Ea killed the sleeping Apsu, took his symbols of authority, crown and aura, and imprisoned his vizier. The primordial father was dead, his place usurped by his own son, the established order violently overturned. This is an act of cosmic significance that reverberates through the rest of the text and through all of Mesopotamian mythology. The younger generation had overthrown the older. The established order had been violently overturned. The primordial father was dead, his place usurped. This pattern of generational conflict, of sons overthrowing fathers to establish new orders, appears in multiple ancient mythologies, from the Greek Titanomachy, where Zeus and the Olympians overthrow Cronus and the Titans, to the Hurrian Hittite Kumarbi cycle, where successive generations of gods battle for supremacy. After killing Apsu, Ea took possession of his dwelling place. He established his own residence on top of the vanquished primordial father, making the defeated father's body his own throne room. The Abzu, which had been the name of the father, now became the name of his dwelling place, the cosmic freshwater ocean beneath the earth, where Ea ruled. The text describes this transformation. He secured the Apsu, made it his dwelling place. He grasped Mummu, held him by the nose rope. After Ea had vanquished and subdued his foes, had secured his triumph over his enemies, had peacefully rested in his innermost chamber, he named it Apsu and appointed it for shrines. The place of defeat became a sacred space. The site of victory became a temple. The body of the father became the foundation for the son's power. In this new dwelling, Ea established his temple and his household. He lived there with his consort Damkina, and it was there, in the defeated body of the primordial father himself, deep in the Abzu that had once been Apsu, that their son would be born. This son would be Marduk, destined to become even greater than his father Ea, to rise to supremacy over all the gods, to defeat threats his father couldn't handle, to become the ultimate cosmic authority. The text describes Marduk's birth in terms of wonder and awe, emphasizing his extraordinary nature from the moment of conception. Inside Apsu, where the gods were created, Marduk was brought into being, and Marduk the leader. Ea, his father, created him. Damkina, his mother, bore him. He suckled the teats of goddesses. The nurse who reared him filled him with awesomeness. From birth, Marduk was different, special, superior. The text emphasizes this repeatedly. Proud was his form, piercing his stare, mature his emergence, he was powerful from the start. Anu, the begetter of his father, saw him. He exulted and glowed, his heart filled with joy. He made him so perfect that his godhead was doubled. Anu, Marduk's grandfather, recognized the child's extraordinary nature and enhanced it further, doubling his divinity, making him super divine, elevating him far above ordinary gods. The description of Marduk continues in terms that strain language, that push beyond normal categories to express something almost incomprehensible. Elevated far above them, he was superior in every way. His limbs were ingeniously made, beyond comprehension, impossible to understand, too difficult to perceive. 4 were his eyes, 4 were his ears. When his lips moved, fire blazed forth. The 4 ears were enormous, and likewise the eyes. They perceived everything. This quadrupling of sensory organs represents not just multiplied ability, but perfect, complete perception. In Mesopotamian cosmology, the 4 directions were fundamental to organizing space. 4 eyes, seeing in 4 directions, meant complete vision, nothing hidden, total awareness. 4 ears hearing from 4 directions meant nothing could be said anywhere that Marduk wouldn't hear. He was omniscient within the spatial cosmos, aware of everything occurring in every direction. When his lips moved, fire blazed forth. This connects to the ancient association between divine speech and creative power. In Genesis, God speaks, and things come into being. In Egyptian mythology, the god Ptah thinks in his heart and speaks with his tongue, and what he speaks becomes real. Marduk's fire speech suggests words of tremendous power, utterances that transform reality, commands that cannot be disobeyed. The text tells us, "Tallest among the gods was he, his form outstanding, his limbs surpassing, his stature towering." Physical superiority matched intellectual and sensory superiority. Marduk represented the perfection of the younger generation of gods, the culmination of divine evolution from the formless primordial waters to increasingly organized, powerful and wise deities. Anu, delighting in his extraordinary grandson, created the 4 winds for Marduk to play with: the north wind, south wind, east wind, and west wind. But Marduk, creative and energetic, wasn't satisfied with just 4 winds. He created additional winds, new types of storms never seen before: the evil wind, the whirlwind, the tornado, the 4-fold wind, the 7-fold wind, winds that had no precedent, innovations in cosmic meteorology. He used these winds to create chaos in the waters, stirring up waves and whirlpools, disturbing Tiamat with turbulence and noise. The text tells us, the gods had no rest being harried by the tempests. They conceived evil in their hearts, and they addressed Tiamat their mother, saying, "When they slew Apsu your consort, you did not aid him, but remained silent. Now Marduk has created the fierce winds, and your vitals are churned up. We cannot rest, we cannot sleep." The complaint mirrors Apsu's earlier complaint about noise disturbing his rest. The cosmic irony is clear. The younger gods had disturbed Apsu's sleep, so he plotted their destruction. Now Marduk, youngest of the gods, was disturbing the other gods' sleep, and they were plotting response, urging Tiamat to take action against this new threat. These complaining gods represented forces aligned with Tiamat, perhaps older gods who resented the rise of the younger generation, who preferred the earlier order when they had more status and power. They played on Tiamat's grief over Apsu's death, her maternal protective instincts, her desire for vengeance. They urged her to make war on the younger gods, to destroy them utterly and restore order according to her will. At first, Tiamat resisted, just as she had resisted Apsu's original plan to destroy the gods. But the plotting gods continued to press her, manipulating her emotions, appealing to her wounded pride, her sense of justice or revenge, her motherly protection of some gods against other gods who had become enemies. They presented it as righteous vengeance for Apsu's murder, as defense of cosmic order, as necessary action to prevent the younger gods from completely destroying the old ways. Finally, the combined pressure wore down her resistance. She agreed to make war on the younger gods, to destroy them utterly and restore order according to her will, to avenge Apsu and silence the noise that was disturbing the cosmos. But this would not be a simple conflict. Tiamat prepared for total war with terrifying thoroughness. She created an army of monsters, beings that had never existed before, creatures designed specifically for battle, that violated all natural categories and boundaries. The text describes them in vivid detail. She stationed a horned serpent, a dragon, and a hairy hero, a lion demon, a mad dog, and a scorpion man, aggressive demons, a fish man, and a bison, carrying merciless weapons, unafraid of battle. Each of these creatures represents some violation of natural order. A serpent with horns combines reptile with mammal features. A fishman mixes aquatic and terrestrial forms. A scorpion man blends human and arthropod. They're all hybrids, chimeras, beings that shouldn't exist, that cross boundaries that normally separate species and categories. This hybridization emphasizes the chaos Tiamat represents, the dissolution of boundaries, the return to undifferentiated mixing. The text tells us Tiamat made 11 such, creatures in total filling out her army with beings designed solely for destruction. They were armed with fearsome weapons. They knew no fear. These weren't natural beings, but war machines, organisms engineered for a single purpose, to kill the younger gods and anyone who supported them. Tiamat then elevated Kingu, one of the gods who had urged her to war, making him her new consort to replace the fallen Apsu. More significantly, she gave him the Tablet of Destinies, one of the most powerful objects in Mesopotamian mythology, perhaps the most powerful. The text describes this investiture. In their midst she elevated Kingu, made him chief among them, command of the army, leadership of the assembly, raising of weapons for combat, directing the battle, overall command. She set him on a throne and said, "I've cast for you the spell, made you greatest in the assembly of the gods. I have put into your hands rule over all the gods. You shall be the greatest, my only consort. Your commands shall prevail over all the Anunnaki." By giving King the Tablet of Destinies, Tiamat was making him the supreme authority in the cosmos, the one who could decree what would be, what would happen, how reality would unfold. Possession of this tablet meant power to determine outcomes, to fix fates, to make decisions that even other gods would have to obey. This wasn't just military command, but cosmic sovereignty, the authority to shape reality itself. When the younger gods learned of Tiamat's preparations, terror seized them like never before. They had reason to fear. The text describes their panic. The gods heard this report and were distressed. They sat in silent paralysis. After reflection, the gods were in mourning, falling silent, not speaking. The situation seemed hopeless. How could they stand against the primordial mother and her army of monsters? How could they face Kingu, empowered by the Tablet of Destinies, wielding cosmic authority itself? Earlier, Ea had defeated Apsu through clever magic. But Tiamat wasn't sleeping, wasn't vulnerable to trick or spell. She was fully aroused for war, prepared, protected by monstrous forces. Anshar, one of the elder gods of the younger generation, tried to find a champion. Someone needed to step forward, to volunteer to face Tiamat, to save the gods from destruction. He first approached Ea, the one who had defeated Apsu. Surely the clever god could find a way to defeat Tiamat as well. The text describes this attempt. Anshar addressed his son Ea. "You are the wisest of the gods, my powerful son. Go, stand before Tiamat, quickly calm her. Let your divine spell soothe her rage." Ea went forth to face Tiamat, confident in his magic, his cleverness, his ability to find solutions to impossible problems. But when he actually saw the full extent of her preparations, when he beheld the army of monsters, when he recognized the impossibility of the situation, his confidence failed. The text tells us simply, he heard this and turned back, went to his father Anshar. He recounted everything that Tiamat had planned. The magic that had worked against sleeping Apsu would not work against Tiamat fully aroused for war. Ea, the wisest of the gods, had failed before even attempting battle. Anshar then turned to Anu, the sky god, the head of the pantheon, the father of Ea. Surely the chief god could defeat the rebels. The text records Anshar's plea. "Anu, you are the mightiest of the great gods. Your position equals that of Anshar. Go and stand before Tiamat. Quickly calm her." Anu accepted the challenge and went forth to face Tiamat, but Anu also failed. The text tells us, but he could not face her and turned back. Even the chief god, the head of the divine assembly, couldn't solve this problem. The greatest gods of the younger generation were powerless before Tiamat's wrath and her monstrous army. The situation seemed impossible. Their destruction appeared inevitable. There was no hope, no solution, no champion capable of saving them. Into this desperate situation stepped Marduk, youngest of the gods but already mightiest, perfect in wisdom and power from birth. He had been listening to the counsels of the gods, understanding the gravity of the situation, recognizing what needed to be done. He knew he could defeat Tiamat. He had the power, the strength, the weapons, the confidence. But he would not act without compensation. He would not risk everything for free. He would not save the gods unless they agreed to his terms. The text presents Marduk's conditions to the assembly. "If I am indeed to be your champion, if I am to defeat Tiamat and save your lives, Then convene the assembly and proclaim a special destiny for me. Sit joyfully together in Ubshu-Kina, let my word instead of yours determine fate. Whatever I create shall remain unaltered. The command of my lips shall not return void, shall not be changed. Marduk demanded supreme authority, the power to decree fates, the position of cosmic king with absolute authority. If he defeated Tiamat, if he saved the gods from destruction, if he risked his existence for their benefit, then they must make him their permanent ruler, their king, their supreme authority. His word would be law. His decisions would be final. His authority would be absolute and unchangeable. The gods were in no position to refuse. They needed a savior desperately, and Marduk was the only one willing and able to take on the task. They had no choice but to agree to his terms. Anshar sent messengers to inform the other gods, to convene the full assembly, to bring all deities together to formally invest Marduk with the authority he demanded. The divine assembly gathered in Ubshu-Kina, the hall where the gods met to make collective decisions. They came together from all their various realms and responsibilities, the senior gods and the junior gods, the Anunnaki who decree fates and the Igigi who do divine labor. The text describes their gathering. They sat at the banquet, dined on bread, drank beer, the sweet drink. As they sipped through their drinking straws, they became very carefree, very expansive. Their hearts became elevated. They decreed the destiny for Marduk, their champion. The detail about drinking straws is charming and revealing. Ancient Mesopotamians drank beer through long reed straws to avoid the barley husks floating on top. The image of gods drinking beer through straws, getting drunk, growing carefree and expansive, humanizes them in a way modern readers might find jarring. These weren't distant, transcendent beings, but divine figures who enjoyed parties, got tipsy, made decisions while under the influence. In this somewhat inebriated state, they formally invested Marduk with supreme authority. But first they tested him, making sure he truly had the power he claimed. The text describes the test. They set up in their midst one constellation and addressed Marduk, their son. Your destiny, Lord, shall be superior to all the gods, command annihilation and existence, and may both come true. May your spoken word destroy the constellation, speak again, and may it be intact. He spoke, and the constellation vanished. He spoke again, and it was restored. This was a test of Marduk's power over reality itself. He could create and destroy with mere words. He could command existence and non-existence. The fabric of reality obeyed his speech. This demonstrated that he had the authority he claimed, the power necessary to be cosmic king, the ability to shape fate and determine outcomes. The gods marveled at this display and formally proclaimed him supreme. When the gods, his fathers, saw the power of his utterance, they were glad and did homage. Marduk is king! They invested him with scepter, throne, and royal robe. They gave him an irresistible weapon to crush the enemy. Go, cut off the life of Tiamat. May the winds carry her blood to out-of-the-way places. Armed with divine mandate and supernatural weapons, Marduk prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of the cosmos. He took up conventional weapons, a bow and quiver of arrows, a mace to carry at his side. But he also wielded unconventional weapons suitable for fighting the primordial ocean. He created a great net to trap his enemy, recruited the four winds to prevent her escape, and mastered additional winds he himself had created. The text describes his full arsenal. He made a bow, designed it as his weapon, attached an arrow, set it in the bowstring. He took up the mace, held it in his right hand, bow and quiver he slung at his side. Lightning he set before him, his body he filled with blazing fire. He made a net to encircle Tiamat within, the four winds he stationed so none of her could escape. South wind, north wind, east wind, west wind, the gift of his grandfather Anu, he fastened at his side. He created the evil wind, the tempest, the whirlwind, the fourfold wind, the sevenfold wind, the tornado, the incomparable wind. He released the 7 winds which he had created, following behind him to churn up Tiamat's vitals. With this terrifying array of weapons and powers, Marduk mounted his storm chariot and went forth to face Tiamat. The text describes his approach. He held high the surging flood as his weapon. He mounted his fearsome chariot, an irresistible, devastating storm, hitched to it 4 horses, destructive, ferocious, overwhelming, swift. Their teeth bore poison, they knew how to trample underfoot, they were trained to crush and destroy. As Marduk approached, Tiamat's forces saw him coming, her army of monsters prepared for battle. Her generals and lieutenants readied themselves. But Tiamat herself, the primordial mother, the saltwater ocean personified, came forward to meet him in single combat. The cosmic battle was about to begin, a fight that would determine whether chaos or order would prevail, whether the old primordial state would be restored or a new creation would emerge. The text describes their confrontation in vivid detail. Face to face they came, Tiamat and Marduk, sage of the gods. They engaged in combat, they approached for battle. The Lord spread out his net, encircled her. The evil wind following behind he released in her face. Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow him. He drove in the evil wind so she could not close her lips. This is the critical moment. Tiamat attempted to swallow Marduk whole, to consume him as the ocean consumes all things. But Marduk was ready. He drove the evil wind, the cosmic tempest he had created, directly into her open mouth. The fierce winds entered her body, inflating her, filling her, preventing her from closing her jaws, making her body swell like a balloon about to burst. The text continues. The raging winds filled her belly became distended, she opened wide her mouth. He shot off the arrow, it broke open her. Belly cut to her innards, it pierced the heart. He subdued her, extinguished her life. He threw down her corpse, stood upon it. With one well-aimed arrow into her inflated belly, Marduk killed the primordial mother. The chaos dragon fell. The saltwater ocean was defeated. The formless potential that had existed before creation was conquered by the organized power of the younger generation. Order had triumphed over chaos, structure over formlessness, the new over the old. When Tiamat fell, her army broke and fled. But Marduk's net caught them all. The monsters she had created, the 11 hybrid beings, all were captured and imprisoned. The text tells us, her whole band of demons who marched at her side were trembling with fear, terrified. They tried to break out and save their lives, but could not escape the encircling net. He threw them in, imprisoned them. The whole pack of demons he smashed with his weapon. Kingu, the general who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, was among the captured. Marduk took from him the tablet, the supreme authority over destiny itself. The text says, he took away the Tablet of Destinies, wrongfully his, sealed it with a seal, fastened it on his breast. The power to decree fate now belonged to Marduk. Ultimate cosmic authority was his. He was the supreme king not just by proclamation but by possession of the tablet itself. Then came perhaps the most significant act of all. Creation from destruction, order from chaos, the transformation of Tiamat's dead body into the cosmos itself. Marduk returned to the corpse of the slain primordial mother and contemplated what he would do with it. The text describes his creative work. The Lord trampled the lower part of Tiamat. With his merciless club he split her skull. He cut the arteries of her blood. The north wind carried it off to out-of-the-way places. Marduk then split Tiamat's corpse in two. Using the halves to create the fundamental structure of the cosmos, he split her in two like a fish for drying. Half of her he set up and made as a cover heaven. He stretched out the hide and assigned watchmen, and ordered them not to let her waters escape. The upper half of Tiamat became the sky, the heavens above. Marduk established guards to prevent her waters from escaping, from returning to the chaotic state. The dome of heaven was literally the primordial ocean held in place above the earth, constrained and organized but still present, still potentially dangerous if not properly controlled. From various parts of Tiamat's body, Marduk created the features of the world we know. The text catalogues his creative acts. He opened the Euphrates and Tigris from her eyes, stopped up her nostrils but left her tears to water the fields. He made mountains from her head, drilled through them springs of water. Her tail he fashioned as a heavenly cable, placed it as the bond of heaven. Her crotch he used as a prop for the sky. He set her body as a foundation for the earth. This is creation through violence, organization through conquest, structure imposed on chaos by force. Modern readers might find it disturbing, but it reflected ancient Mesopotamian understanding of how order emerges from disorder, how structure requires overcoming resistance, how civilization itself requires constant struggle against the forces that would return everything to chaos. Marduk then organized the cosmos in detail, establishing all the regular patterns and cycles that govern reality. The text describes this organizational work. He made the stations for the great gods. He established the stars their likenesses as constellations. He designated the year, defined the divisions, appointed 3 stars each to the 12 months. After he had designed the plans of the year, he established the station of the Jupiter star to mark their boundaries. Marduk created the calendar, organizing time itself into regular, predictable patterns. He assigned celestial bodies to mark these patterns, giving the moon its phases, the sun its daily path, the planets their wandering courses against the fixed stars. He established which gods would be responsible for which aspects of cosmic maintenance, distributing duties and responsibilities throughout the divine hierarchy. The Enuma Elish devotes considerable attention to these organizational details, emphasizing that creation wasn't just bringing things into existence but arranging them in proper order, giving everything its place and function, establishing the laws that would govern how reality operates. Marduk created a cosmos, an ordered universe, not just a collection of random objects. With the physical cosmos created and organized, there remained one problem: labor. Someone needed to maintain all this structure Marduk had created. The temples that would connect Earth to heaven needed to be built and staffed. The fields needed to be cultivated. The rituals that sustained the gods needed to be performed. Who would do this work? The Divine Assembly discussed this problem. The junior gods, the Igigi, had been assigned various cosmic maintenance tasks, and they were already complaining about the burden. They wanted relief from their labours. They needed workers, servants, beings who would perform the tasks the gods found burdensome. Marduk, supreme in wisdom as in power, had the solution. He announced to the assembly, "I shall create a savage, man shall be his name. I shall create a savage man. He will be charged with service to the gods that they might have ease. I shall artfully alter the ways of the gods. Though equally divided, they shall be separated into two." This is a crucial statement about why humanity exists according to Babylonian theology. We aren't created for our own sake, to have fellowship with the gods, to fulfill some purpose inherent to our nature. We're created to be workers, servants, those who will maintain the cosmos and serve the gods so the divine beings can rest from labour. Our value lies in our utility to the gods, our ability to perform necessary tasks. But humanity couldn't be created from nothing. The gods didn't create ex nihilo. They worked with materials, transforming and organising what already existed. For humanity, special materials would be needed. Something divine to give intelligence and spirit, something earthly to give mortality and limitation. The combination would produce beings who could understand and perform their assigned tasks but wouldn't live forever or threaten divine supremacy. The Divine Assembly determined that King, the defeated general of Tiamat's army, the one who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, would provide the necessary divine essence. The text records their decision. It was King who created the strife, made Tiamat rebel and prepare for battle. They bound him and held him before Ea. They inflicted the punishment on him, severed his arteries from his blood. They created mankind, imposed the labour of the gods, and released the gods from it. King was brought forth from among the bound gods, identified as the one responsible for the war. Whether this was entirely fair is debatable. Tiamat had needed considerable urging before agreeing to make war. Multiple gods had encouraged her. King was chosen perhaps because he had worn the Tablet of Destinies, making him the most prominent symbol of the rebellion. He became the scapegoat, the one who would bear the punishment for all the defeated gods. He was slain, his arteries severed, his blood collected. This blood, the vital essence of a god, was mixed with clay, the fundamental earthly material. From this mixture, the goddess Nintu, also called Ninhursag, Mami, or Beletili depending on context, fashioned the first humans. The Atrahasis epic, which gives us more detail about this creation process, describes how Nintu pinched off 14 pieces of clay, mixing each with divine blood. From 7 pieces she made males, from 7 she made females. These 14 became the ancestors of all humanity, 7 pairs representing perhaps the 7 great cities of Mesopotamia, or simply the perfection of the number 7 in ancient symbolism. This origin story is crucial to understanding Mesopotamian views of human nature. We are made from divine blood, specifically from the blood of a rebellious god who defied cosmic order. This gives humanity divine essence within us, intelligence, spirit, creativity, the capacity for civilization. We're not merely animals, but creatures with a spark of divinity, bearers of divine substance. But we're mixed with clay, with earth, with mortal material. This gives us limitations, mortality, vulnerability. We age, sicken, die. We need food, water, shelter. We suffer pain, fear death, face the limitations of finite existence. The divine essence within us is constrained by mortal flesh. Moreover, we're made from the blood of a rebel, God, someone who defied cosmic order and faced the ultimate punishment. This means we carry within us an inherent tendency toward rebellion, toward transgression, toward violation of divine laws and natural boundaries. We have both the divine spark that gives us capacity for greatness and the rebellious impulse that drives us toward destruction. We are creatures of contradiction, capable of both sublime creation and terrible destruction. the purpose of humanity is stated clearly in multiple Mesopotamian texts. We exist to serve the gods, to bear the burdens of cosmic maintenance, to provide offerings and worship that sustain the divine realm. The Atrahasis epic makes this explicit. Let man assume the drudgery of the gods. Let him bear the yoke. Man shall till the ground. Let him supply the temples with their food. We are created as workers, servants, those who will perform the agricultural labour and temple service that the gods no longer want to do themselves. The text describes human existence as bearing a yoke, like oxen pulling a plough, labouring under a burden placed upon us by our creators. This is a very different creation narrative than Genesis, where humanity is made in the image of God, given dominion over creation, blessed, and told to be fruitful and multiply. In the Mesopotamian view, we're created for divine convenience, to meet divine needs. Our value lies in our utility to the gods, our ability to maintain their temples, provide their offerings, perform their rituals. We exist to serve, and the gods depend on that service for their sustenance and comfort. Yet, there's an important nuance that tempers this harsh assessment. The goddess who creates humanity, Nintu or Ninhursag, is portrayed as genuinely caring for her creations. She's described as the mother of humanity, protective and loving toward the being she fashioned from clay and blood. When the gods later decide to destroy humanity with a flood, Nintu weeps bitterly, mourning what will be lost, lamenting that she ever agreed to participate in human creation if this would be the result. The Atrahasis epic preserves her lament. How could I in the assembly of the gods order such destruction with them? Enlil was strong enough for such an order, for our annihilation. Like that brood I planned, how have they filled the seas? Like dragonflies have they filled the rivers. The offspring of the god I created, I see them as foam. This maternal grief shows us that at least some gods genuinely cared for humanity, despite having created us for utilitarian purposes. The relationship wasn't simply master-slave, but had elements of parent-child, with the complications and genuine emotion that implies. Humanity meant something to the gods beyond just our labour value. We were their creation, their children in a sense, even if we were also their servants. With humanity created and assigned their role, the gods could now establish civilization properly. Cities would be founded, kingship would descend from heaven, temples would be built, and the complex dance between divine and mortal realms could begin in earnest. According to the Sumerian tradition preserved in both the King List and the Eridu Genesis, after humanity was created, the gods decided to establish cities. This wasn't described as a gradual human development, but as a deliberate divine action. The gods chose specific locations for cities, assigned patron deities to each, determined how they would be organized and governed. Cities weren't human inventions, but divine institutions, patterns of heaven brought down to earth. The Eridu Genesis, despite being badly damaged, preserves crucial information about this process. After describing how humanity and animals were created, in sections now mostly lost, the text turns to the establishment of cities. After Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag had created the black-headed people, they made animals multiply on the earth, the living creatures of the steppe, as befits them, they had them. The black-headed people was a Sumerian term for humans, probably referring to typical hair colour as distinct from gods, who might be depicted with different characteristics. The gods first created humans and animals, then began organising them into the civilized order that would characterise the antediluvian world. The text continues. After kingship had descended from heaven, after the exalted crown and throne of kingship had descended from heaven, the rights and exalted powers were perfected, the cities were established in pure places. This passage emphasizes that kingship wasn't a human development, but a divine gift, an institution created in heaven and then transmitted to earth. The first kings ruled by divine appointment, representing the gods on earth, mediating between heaven and humanity. The Eridu Genesis then lists the first 5 cities founded before the flood: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak Sipa, and Shuruppak. Each city received kingship from heaven, each had its patron deity, each played a role in the cosmic order. The text preserves the names, the king properly regulated in accordance with the rights for the given 5 settled places. The cities are called by their names and divided up among the princely divine lords. Eridu came first, established as the most ancient city, sacred to Enki, built on the Abzu itself where the god of wisdom dwelt. Archaeological excavations at the site of Eridu, modern Tel Abu Sharain in southern Iraq, have confirmed extraordinary antiquity. The lowest occupation levels date to around 5400 BCE, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in Mesopotamia, and possibly the world. The importance of Eridu in Sumerian consciousness cannot be overstated. It represented the origin point of civilization, the place where divine wisdom first established itself on Earth, the link between the cosmic ocean beneath the Earth and human society above. Enki's temple there, called the Abzu, or House of the Abzu, was believed to be built directly over the entrance to the cosmic freshwater ocean from which all wisdom flows. This choice of Eridu as the first city reveals Sumerian priorities. Civilization wasn't founded first on military power, which might have favoured Uruk, city of warrior kings, or on religious authority in general, which might have favoured Nippur, city of Enlil. Instead, it began with wisdom, with knowledge, with the divine insight that comes from Enki. Human civilization was built on a foundation of revealed knowledge, divine teaching, access to the secrets of the cosmos. After Eridu came Bad Tabira, city of metalworking, where the goddess Ninta had a temple. The name Bad Tabira means wall of the coppersmith, indicating the city's association with metallurgy. This was the second city, suggesting that after wisdom came technology, after divine knowledge came the practical arts, after the foundation of understanding came the tools of civilization. Third was Larak, whose patron deity was Pabilsag, a god associated with judgment and boundaries. Little is known about this city archaeologically, and it remains unidentified in the modern landscape, perhaps destroyed so thoroughly that nothing recognizable remains. Fourth was Sippar, city of Shamash, Utu in Sumerian, the sun god associated with law and justice. Shamash was the divine judge who saw everything that happened in the daylight, whose rays illuminated all secrets, who could distinguish truth from falsehood, right from wrong. His city Sippar represented law, justice, the social order that allows civilization to function. The archaeological site of Sippar has yielded thousands of tablets, mostly from later periods, but confirming the city's importance as a religious and legal centre. Finally came Shuruppak, city of Ninlil, where Ziusudra, the flood hero, would later rule as the last antediluvian king. This would be the city from which the salvation of humanity and all living things would come when the flood destroyed everything else. Archaeological excavations at Shuruppak, modern Tel Farah, revealed a major flooding layer dating to around 2900 BCE. Though whether this has any connection to the flood traditions is debated, 5 cities before the flood, each with its divine patron, each playing a specific role in maintaining civilization and serving the gods. These weren't random settlements, but deliberately planned sacred centers, links between heaven and earth, places where divine will was enacted through human labor. Together they represented a complete system. Wisdom, Eridu, technology, Bad Tabira, law, Larak and Sippar, and human survival, Shuruppak. And ruling these cities were kings, but not ordinary kings. These were the antediluvian monarchs whose very existence testifies to how different the primordial world was from our own. The Sumerian king list preserves their names and reign, lengths in numbers that challenge modern understanding and have puzzled scholars for over a century. The king list opens with that crucial theological statement we examined earlier. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This establishes kingship as divine in origin, created in heaven and then brought to earth, not developed by humans but given by gods. The institution of monarchy itself was seen as part of the cosmic order, a way of organizing human society according to heavenly patterns. The first king was Alulim of Eridu, his reign length 28,800 years. The second king was Alaljar, who ruled for 36,000 years. These numbers are given consistently across multiple manuscript copies of the king list, indicating they weren't scribal errors or corrupt text but intentional statements about the duration of these ancient reigns. The numbers get even larger when kingship moved to Bad Tabira. Enmenlu-Ana ruled for 43,200 years, Enmen-Galana for 28,800 years, Dumuzid the shepherd, who would later become a major deity in Sumerian religion, for 36,000 years. Just these 3 kings in one city total 108,000 years of rule. The pattern continues. At Larak, Insipad-Zid-Ana ruled for 28,800 years. At Sippar, Enmen-Durana reigned for 21,000 years. And finally at Shuruppak, Ubaratutu ruled for 18,600 years before the flood swept everything away. In total, 8 kings in 5 cities, combined reign length, 241,200 years. This is the Sumerian testimony about the duration of the antediluvian period, from when kingship first descended from heaven until the flood destroyed the old world. Over 250,000 years of divine kingship before the catastrophe. These numbers are so vast, so incomprehensible by modern standards, that scholars have proposed numerous explanations. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal, base 60 mathematical system, which we still use for measuring time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and for measuring angles 360 degrees in a circle. Perhaps the numbers should be divided by 60 to get more reasonable figures, but this doesn't work consistently, and even divided by 60, some reigns would still be impossibly long. Maybe division by 3,600, Seah, the Sumerian term for the largest standard unit, would help. This brings Alulim's reign down to 8 years, which is too short. Perhaps the numbers are products of 3,600 that should be understood differently. Scholars have tried numerous mathematical manipulations, but none work perfectly across all the kings. Others suggest the numbers are symbolic rather than literal, representing dynasties rather than individuals. Perhaps each king was actually a series of rulers, a lineage or dynasty represented by a single name and an aggregate reign length. This would make the numbers more plausible, but requires assuming the ancient scribes who preserved these lists didn't understand what they were copying, that they mistook dynastic periods for individual reigns. Still others propose that the numbers might encode astronomical cycles or mathematical patterns meaningful to ancient Mesopotamian priests. The numbers do show some patterns. Many are multiples of 3,600 or 600 or 60. Perhaps they encode information about planetary cycles, lunar phases, stellar precession, or other astronomical phenomena that the Sumerians tracked with remarkable precision. Some modern esoteric and alternative history writers take the numbers more literally, proposing they represent actual memories of a time when human lifespans were dramatically different, when the world operated under different physical laws, when aging occurred much more slowly. They point to similar traditions in other cultures about declining lifespans from golden ages to iron ages, from times of perfection to times of degeneration. What we can say with certainty is that the Sumerians themselves took these numbers seriously. They copied them generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. Multiple versions of the king list exist, from different cities and periods, and while they show some variations in details, they consistently preserve these vast numbers for the antediluvian kings. The scribes who maintained this tradition believed they were preserving accurate information about the distant past. Moreover, the pattern of declining lifespans that appears after the flood in the king list parallels similar patterns in Genesis and other ancient traditions. After the flood, the Sumerian kings still ruled for hundreds or thousands of years, far longer than normal humans, but dramatically shorter than their antediluvian predecessors. Over successive generations and dynasties, reign lengths continued to decline gradually, eventually approaching normal human spans. This same pattern appears in Genesis with the patriarchs. Before the flood, they lived for over 900 years. Noah, who survived the flood, lived 950 years. His immediate descendants had progressively shorter lives. By the time of Abraham, lifespans were down to 175 years. Eventually they reached the 70 years, that Psalm 90 describes as the natural human limit. Greek tradition shows a similar pattern with Hesiod's 5 ages of humanity. The Golden Age when people lived like gods, free from toil and sorrow, with very long lives. The Silver Age with somewhat shorter lives. The Bronze Age shorter still. The Heroic Age, an insertion disrupting the pattern of decline. And finally, the Iron Age, our current state, with short lives and hard labour. Hindu tradition preserves the concept of yugas, vast cosmic ages measured in hundreds of thousands or millions of years, during which human capacities and lifespans decline from the Satya Yuga, age of truth, through the Treta and Dvapara Yugas to the current Kali Yuga, age of darkness, where human life is shortest and most difficult. The widespread appearance of this pattern across multiple ancient cultures separated by geography and time suggests it represents something deep in human consciousness, some archetypal memory or intuition about a lost golden age when existence was different, better, characterized by longer life and closer communion with the divine. Whether this has any basis in actual history is impossible to determine with current evidence. No physical remains of humans who lived tens of thousands of years have been found. The oldest definitively human skeletal remains show the same aging patterns as modern humans. The archaeological record doesn't support literally reading these numbers as biological lifespans. But perhaps the numbers encode other information. Perhaps they represent cultural memories passed down through so many generations that the timescale became distorted, stretched, mythologized. Perhaps they preserve information about dynastic periods or cultural eras rather than individual lives. Perhaps they're symbolic, encoding theological or cosmological truths rather than historical data. What matters for our purposes tonight is that the Sumerians believed in this pattern of declining lifespans, that they saw the antediluvian age as fundamentally different from their own time, that they preserved a memory of kings who ruled for impossibly long periods before the flood destroyed that earlier world. This belief shaped how they understood their place in cosmic history, their relationship to the past, and the trajectory of human existence from its origins to their present. Each of these antediluvian kings, according to later Mesopotamian tradition, had a divine advisor, a sage who guided him in wisdom and knowledge. These advisors were the Apkallu, 7 semi-divine culture bearers who would play crucial roles in establishing civilization, and whose stories have remarkable parallels to later traditions about the Watchers and fallen angels. The Apkallu represent one of the most fascinating elements of Mesopotamian mythology, beings who crossed boundaries between divine and mortal realms, who taught humanity the arts and sciences necessary for civilization, who brought knowledge from the gods to humans, who mediated between heaven and earth. They appear in texts spanning thousands of years, from the 3rd millennium BCE through the Hellenistic period, always portrayed as extraordinary beings who lived before the flood and established the foundations of all learning. The Uruk list of kings and sages, a text from the late 2nd century BCE that summarizes much older traditions, gives us the clearest picture of the Apkallu system. According to this list, each of the first 7 antediluvian kings had one of the Apkallu as his personal advisor. These weren't ordinary court counselors or human wise men, but divine beings sent from Enki's realm to teach and guide. The first Apkallu was Wana, called by various names in different traditions. Sometimes he's Adapa, sometimes Oannes in Greek sources. He served as advisor to Alulim, the first king of Eridu. The descriptions of Wana are remarkable and strange, emphasizing his non-human nature and his role as intermediary between worlds. Berossus, the Babylonian priest who wrote in Greek around 281 BCE, provided the most detailed description of Oannes Wana that has survived. His account is worth quoting at length, because it captures the strange boundary-crossing nature of these beings. In the first year there appeared from the Red Sea, in the part which borders Babylonia, an animal endowed with reason, whose name was Oan. The whole body of the animal was like that of a fish, and under the fish's head he had another head, with feet also below similar to those of a man, and it had a human voice. A representation of him is preserved to this day. This being was accustomed to pass the day among men, but took no food at that season. He gave them an insight into letters and sciences and arts of every kind. He taught them to construct cities, to found temples, to compile laws, and explained to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth, and showed them how to collect the fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften manners and humanize their lives. From that time, nothing material has been added by way of improvement to his instructions. When the sun set, this being Oannes retired again into the sea, and passed the night in the deep, for he was amphibious. This description gives us crucial information about how the Mesopotamians understood the Apkallu. They were fish-like, associated with water, specifically with the Abzu, the cosmic ocean beneath the earth where Enki dwelt. They emerged from the water to walk on land among humans during daylight, but returned to the sea each night. They were amphibious, capable of existing in both realms, literally bridging the boundary between the aquatic, divine realm and the terrestrial human realm. Berossus emphasizes that Oannes taught comprehensively letters, writing, sciences, arts, city construction, temple founding, law compilation, geometry, agriculture, and everything necessary to transform primitive humans into civilized beings. This wasn't partial knowledge or limited teaching, but complete cultural transmission, the full package of civilization delivered from divine source to human recipients. The fish form is significant beyond just being strange or exotic. In Mesopotamian symbolism, fish were associated with the Abzu, with fresh water, with the realm of Enki. The fish-man, or fish-garbed figure, became a standard representation in art for divine wisdom, sacred knowledge, the transmission of secret understanding. Cylinder seals and relief sculptures show fish-garbed figures performing purification rituals, blessing kings, warding off evil. The form became synonymous with divine knowledge and protective power. The other 6 Apkallu followed Wana, each serving a different king, each adding to humanity's accumulated knowledge. The Uruk list names them: Wanduga or Wanaduga, who served Alalja and was endowed with comprehensive intelligence; Enmeduga, who served Enmenluana; Enmegalama, who served Enmengalana; Enmebeluga, who served Dumuzid; Anenlilda, who served Enspadzidana; and finally Utwabzu, who served Enmendurana at Sippar. These 7 sages were credited with extraordinary cultural achievements. According to various texts, they founded the 7 ancient cities of Mesopotamia. The temple hymn of Kuara states that all 7 sages originally belonged to Eridu, the city of Enki, their divine patron. but they spread out from there to establish Ur, Nippur, Kulub, Kesh, Lagash, and Shuruppak. The Epic of Gilgamesh credits them with laying the foundations of Uruk. Go up, walk on the walls of Uruk, inspect the foundation terrace and examine the brickwork. Testify that its bricks are baked bricks, and that the 7 sages must have laid its foundations. This passage indicates that any truly ancient and impressive construction was attributed to the Apkallu, that their wisdom and skill surpassed anything humans alone could accomplish. They taught the Me, those fundamental principles or decrees that governed all aspects of civilized existence. In Sumerian thought, the Me weren't abstract concepts, but concrete powers, almost physical objects that could be possessed, transferred, or stolen. They included everything from kingship and priesthood to art and music, from law and justice to prostitution and warfare, encompassing every activity and institution that makes up civilized life. Enki kept the Me in his temple at Eridu, guarding them, controlling their distribution among the gods and cities. The Apkallu, as his servants and representatives, had knowledge of all the Me and taught humanity how to implement them, how to organize society according to these divine principles. This knowledge transformed primitive humans from beasts into civilized beings, capable of maintaining complex societies and serving the gods properly. The comprehensive nature of what the Apkallu taught cannot be overstated. Writing and mathematics provided the tools for record-keeping, calculation, measurement, enabling administration, trade, and science. Astronomy allowed tracking of time, prediction of seasons, organization of agricultural cycles, and development of the calendar. Agriculture itself had to be taught: when to plant, when to harvest, how to irrigate, how to breed better crops and livestock. Metallurgy enabled tool and weapon production, advancing beyond Stone Age technology to bronze and eventually iron. Architecture allowed construction of monumental buildings, temples that reached toward heaven, palaces that housed kings, city walls that provided defense. Law provided the framework for social organization, resolving disputes, maintaining justice, enabling cooperation on large scales. Medicine gave knowledge of treating diseases, healing wounds, using herbs and potions for health. Magic and divination provided ways of communicating with divine powers, reading omens, predicting the future, protecting against evil. Music and art enriched life beyond mere survival, expressing beauty, worshipping gods, celebrating human achievements. All of this, according to Mesopotamian tradition, was taught by the Apkallu. They were comprehensive culture bearers, transmitting the complete package of civilization from divine source to human recipients. Without their teaching, humanity would have remained primitive, unable to build cities, maintain temples, or serve the gods as we were created to do. But there's a darker undercurrent in the Apkallu traditions that emerges more clearly in later texts. Hints of transgression, suggestions that something went wrong, that the teaching of knowledge crossed boundaries that should have been maintained, that the Apkallu overstepped their proper role and faced judgment for it. The Epic of Error, a Babylonian poem from the 1st millennium BCE, has Marduk himself lamenting the Apkallu's absence. Where are the 7 sages of the Apsu, the pure Puradu fish, who just as their lord Ea have been endowed with sublime wisdom? The answer, revealed later in the text, is that Marduk banished them back to the Apsu, sending them down to the cosmic ocean, forbidding them from ascending to Earth again. Why? What crime did they commit? The text doesn't explicitly state it, but clearly their presence on Earth had become problematic. They had violated boundaries, taught too much or the wrong things, crossed lines that should not have been crossed. Marduk, as supreme king of the gods and guardian of cosmic order, determined they needed to be removed. Their direct influence on humanity ended. The age of divine teachers walking among mortals brought to a close. A ritual text called Bit, Messerie used for protecting houses with magical figurines, mentions that certain Apkallu brought up the flood, or were associated with the catastrophe in some way. This suggests their activities contributed to the corruption that necessitated the flood, that they were implicated in whatever went wrong during the antediluvian period that required cosmic reset. Moreover, we have the crucial detail that after the flood, when Apkallu appeared again, they were no longer purely divine but hybrids, part divine and part human. The Uruk list names 4 post-diluvian Apkallu: Nungal Pirigaldim, Pirigal Nungal, Pirigal Absu, and Lunana. The last is specifically described as being only 2/3 Apkallu, implying 1/3 human ancestry. If there were part human Apkallu after the flood, this strongly suggests that the original divine Apkallu had interbred with humans before the flood, producing hybrid offspring who inherited both divine wisdom and mortal limitations. The texts don't describe this directly, don't give us narratives of Apkallu taking human wives. but the implication from the hybrid nature of their post-flood successors seems clear. These hybrid post-flood Apkallu are also associated with some kind of transgression. They're said to have committed deeds that angered the gods, though again the exact nature of their crimes remains unclear. After them came the fully human advisors called Ummanu, scholars and scribes who served kings but had no divine component. The progression from divine Apkallu to hybrid part, Apkallu, to fully human Umanu represents a gradual distancing between divine and human realms, a closing of boundaries that had once been more permeable. This pattern of boundary crossing, hybrid offspring, transgression, judgment, and ultimate separation between divine and mortal realms appears strikingly similar to what we find in the Book of Enoch and related Jewish traditions about the Watchers. The parallels are extensive enough that scholars have long debated whether there's direct influence, common cultural heritage, or independent development of similar themes. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch are explicitly fallen angels, divine beings who descend to earth not to help humanity, but to satisfy their own lust for human women. 200 angels, led by Shemir descend to Mount Hermon in the days of Jared, 6 generations after Adam. They swear a binding oath, knowing their plan is transgressive, committing to it collectively so none can back out, sharing guilt so all will share fate. They take wives from among the daughters of men, choosing whomever they want based on beauty and desire. Their wives bear them children, but these offspring aren't normal humans. They're Nephilim, giants of tremendous size and appetite, beings that violate natural categories, products of a forbidden union between angelic and human natures. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim. They became pregnant and gave birth to great giants whose height was 300 cubits. They consumed all the acquisitions of men. When men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. These aren't the wise, beneficent culture heroes of the Apkallu tradition, but monsters, destructive forces, beings whose very existence represents corruption of the natural order. They consume everything, and when natural resources can't satisfy their appetites, they turn to cannibalism, eating both humans and each other. They sin against all categories of creatures, violating every boundary, creating chaos wherever they go. Meanwhile, the Watchers themselves are teaching humanity various arts and sciences, but unlike the Apkallu's benevolent cultural transmission, this teaching is presented as corrupting and forbidden from the start. Azazel teaches men to make weapons of war, swords, knives, shields, breastplates, all the implements of violence and slaughter. He teaches women the arts of adornment, cosmetics, jewelry, beautification techniques that lead to vanity, seduction, sexual immorality. Shemir teaches enchantments and root cutting, magic that can heal or harm, knowledge that gives power but also opens doors to dangerous forces. Amaros teaches the resolving of enchantments, counter-magic, the breaking of spells. Barakel teaches astrology, the reading of signs in the stars, attempting to predict fate and divine will through celestial observation. Kokabil teaches the constellations, Ezekiel teaches knowledge of clouds, Arakiel teaches the signs of the earth, Shamsiel teaches the signs of the sun, Sariel teaches the course of the moon. This astronomical and meteorological knowledge is presented as problematic, as revealing too much, as empowering humanity to read divine intentions in the heavens, to try to predict and potentially manipulate fate through understanding of celestial mechanics. The Book of Enoch sees this as transgressive, as knowledge meant to remain hidden from mortal understanding, as secrets that corrupt those who learn them. The theological framework is completely different from the Mesopotamian Apkallu tradition. The Enochic Watchers aren't sent by God to help humanity, but descend on their own initiative, driven by lust and rebellion. Their teaching isn't beneficial cultural transmission, but revelation of forbidden knowledge that corrupts. The weapons they teach lead to violence. The cosmetics they reveal lead to vanity and sexual sin. The astronomical knowledge they impart opens doors better left closed. Yet both traditions preserve key structural elements. Divine beings descending to earth before the flood, teaching humanity various arts and sciences, crossing boundaries between realms, producing hybrid offspring, implied for Apkallu, explicit for Watchers, engaging in some form of transgression that angers the gods, facing judgment and removal. Whether through direct influence, common cultural heritage, or independent development of similar themes, the Apkallu and the Watchers tell variations of what seems to be a larger ancient Near Eastern story. The question of influence becomes more pointed when we remember the historical context. The Jews were exiled to Babylon in 586 BCE, living there for several generations, exposed daily to Mesopotamian culture, mythology, and literature. They would have heard stories about the Apkallu, about divine sages who taught civilization, about hybrid beings, about transgression and judgment. These stories could have influenced how they understood and elaborated the brief mention in Genesis 6:1-4 about the sons of God taking wives from the daughters of men. Genesis itself gives us only a few verses about this. When human beings began to grow numerous on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw how beautiful the daughters of human beings were, and they took for their wives whomever they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. This brief passage raises more questions than it answers. Who were these sons of God? Angels? Divine beings? Descendants of Seth, as opposed to Cain? Why did they desire human women? What were the Nephilim exactly? Why does the text mention them here? What's the connection between the sons of God taking wives and the Nephilim appearing? The Book of Enoch can be read as an extended interpretation and elaboration of these 4 verses, explaining who the sons of God were, the Watchers, what motivated them, lust, what they taught, forbidden knowledge, who the Nephilim were, giant offspring of the unions, why this was wrong, violation of cosmic boundaries, and what consequences followed: violence, corruption, flood, judgment. This elaboration could have been influenced by the Apkallu traditions the exiled Jews encountered in Babylon. The Mesopotamian stories provided a model for understanding divine beings who descend to earth, teach knowledge, produce offspring, and face judgment. The Jewish interpreters transformed this into a narrative of rebellion and punishment, consistent with monotheistic theology, where such beings must be fallen angels defying God rather than divine emissaries sent by one God to help humanity against another God's wishes. The 7th figure in each tradition deserves special attention because the parallels are so specific. In Genesis, the 7th from Adam is Enoch, who walked with God and was not, for God took him. This brief mention indicates Enoch had a special relationship with God and didn't die normally but was taken to heaven while still alive. The Book of Enoch greatly elaborates this brief mention, telling how Enoch was taken to heaven, shown the secrets of creation, taught about the movements of heavenly bodies, informed about the fate of the Watchers and the coming judgment, given knowledge about the structure of the cosmos, the dwelling places of spirits, the nature of hell, the future of humanity. He became the great sage of the antediluvian world, the one who received and transmitted divine knowledge. In the Sumerian king list, the 7th king is Enmen-dur-ena of Sippar. In later Babylonian tradition, this figure becomes a Medoranki, who, according to texts from the 1st millennium BCE, was taken to the assembly of the gods, taught the secrets of divination, shown the tablets of heaven and the mysteries of earth, instructed in how to read omens from the organs of sacrificed animals and the movements of heavenly bodies. He became the founder of the Baru priests, the diviners who read omens and prophecies. He was said to have ascended to heaven like Enoch. The parallels are too specific to be coincidental. 7th in the lineage from the beginning. Special divine knowledge received directly. Taken to heaven while alive or to the divine assembly, shown secrets of earth and heaven, founded a tradition of sacred knowledge transmitted to future generations, either the biblical tradition borrowed from Mesopotamian sources, transforming Enmeduranki into Enoch, or both preserved memory of some common ancient tradition about a 7th antediluvian figure who received special revelation. Modern scholars generally accept that some level of influence occurred, that the Jewish scribes who shaped Genesis and wrote Enoch were aware of Mesopotamian traditions and incorporated elements while transforming them theologically. The direction of influence is clear from chronology. The Mesopotamian texts are older, the Jewish texts came later, and the Jewish community was physically present in Mesopotamia during the crucial period when these traditions were being written down and elaborated. But this doesn't mean simple copying. The Jewish interpreters took familiar ancient Near Eastern narrative patterns and infused them with their own theological understanding. The Apkallu became Watchers, culture bearers became rebels, divine service became transgression, ambiguous boundary crossing became clear moral violation. The transformation reflects the shift from polytheistic to monotheistic frameworks, from cosmos maintained by competing divine forces to universe governed by one God whose will is law. What both traditions share is a belief that the antediluvian world was fundamentally different from the world that came after. Divine beings walked on earth then. Knowledge was revealed that transformed humanity. Boundaries were crossed that would later become impassable. Something went catastrophically wrong that required the world to be destroyed, and restarted with new limitations in place. The Mesopotamian flood narratives, particularly Atrahasis and the Eridu, Genesis, tell us why this destruction became necessary. Humanity had grown too numerous, too noisy, too disturbing to the gods' rest. Enlil, chief of the gods in Sumerian tradition, couldn't sleep because of human clamour. He tried various solutions: drought, famine, plague. Each time Enki warned his devotees and taught them survival techniques. Finally, Enlil called a divine assembly and demanded a permanent solution: total destruction through flood. The gods swore an oath that none would warn humanity, but Enki, bound by his oath yet unwilling to see his creation destroyed, found his famous loophole. He spoke to the wall of the reed house where his faithful servant Atrahasis, Ziusudra in Sumerian, was sleeping. Speaking to the wall, not to the man, Enki warned of the coming flood and instructed that a great boat should be built. Atrahasis Ziusudra, the last antediluvian king, the righteous priest-king of Shuruppak, followed these instructions. He built a boat of specified dimensions, loaded it with his family, representatives of all animal life, the seed of all plants, craftsmen and specialists needed to restart civilization. When the boat was complete, the flood began. The descriptions across various Mesopotamian versions are terrifying. The storm god released his full fury. Adad thundered in the clouds, lightning blazed, darkness covered the sky. The dikes controlling the rivers were demolished. Water poured from above and surged up from below. For 7 days and 7 nights the flood raged. Everything was covered, all cities destroyed, every work of humanity swept away. The gods themselves cowered in fear, weeping at the destruction they decreed. Nintu, the mother goddess, lamented, "How could I, in the assembly of the gods, order such destruction? Enlil was strong enough for such a command, but did we need to destroy everything?" This divine regret, this recognition that they'd overreacted, humanizes the Mesopotamian gods in ways later monotheistic traditions would avoid. When the waters receded, Atrahasis Ziusudra emerged and immediately made sacrifice. The gods, starving for worship after 7 days without offerings, gathered around the sacrifice like flies. They realized their dependence on humanity, how their attempt at total destruction had backfired. They needed humans to serve them, provide offerings, maintain temples. Destroying us completely meant destroying themselves. Enlil eventually relented, blessed Ziusudra with immortality as reward for faithfulness, and agreed to alternative population control measures rather than another flood. The world began again, but differently. Kingship descended from heaven again, but to new cities with shorter-reigned kings. The Apkallu didn't return. Human scholars took their place. Lifespans declined progressively. Boundaries between heaven and earth were more firmly established. This pattern of post-flood limitation appears in Genesis 2. After the flood, God establishes the Rainbow Covenant, promising never again to destroy Earth by flood. Human lifespans begin their gradual decline from Noah's 950 years toward normal spans. The age when divine beings took human wives is over. Direct divine interventions become less frequent. The world has changed fundamentally, become our world, with its mortal limitations and divine distance. So what happened before the Watchers came to Earth, according to these ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts? The comprehensive answer requires synthesizing everything we've explored tonight. The cosmos was created through violent divine conflict, Marduk defeating Tiamat and organizing reality from primordial chaos. The gods were born through successive generations, each more powerful and organized than the last. Heaven and earth were separated, creating space for life. Humanity was fashioned from the blood of a rebellious god mixed with clay, created specifically to serve divine needs, to maintain temples, provide offerings, perform the labor the gods found burdensome. We carry divine essence within us, but mixed with mortal limitations and rebellious tendencies. The first cities were founded by divine decree: Eridu sacred to Enki, Bad Tibera for metalworking, Larak for boundaries, Sippa for justice, Shuruppak where the flood hero would rule. Kingship descended from heaven as a divine institution, not a human development. The antediluvian kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, suggesting time operated differently or was measured by different standards. The 7 Apkallu emerged from the cosmic ocean, fish-garbed sages who taught humanity everything necessary for civilization: writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, architecture, law, medicine, magic, divination. They crossed boundaries between divine and mortal realms, bringing knowledge from heaven to earth. They served as advisors to the antediluvian kings, guiding humanity's development according to divine plans. But something went wrong. The Apkallu transgressed somehow, crossed boundaries that shouldn't have been crossed, taught knowledge that should have remained hidden, possibly produced hybrid offspring, they were eventually banished by Marduk back to the Abzu, forbidden from returning to Earth. Meanwhile, humanity was thriving, multiplying, filling the Earth with noise that disturbed the gods' rest. Enlil couldn't sleep. He tried various population controls, drought, famine, plague. Each time Enki thwarted him. Finally Enlil decreed total destruction through flood, and all the gods swore oaths not to warn humanity. But Enki found his loophole, warning Ziusudra through the wall. The flood came, destroying everything except those in the boat. The world began again, but differently, with new limitations, shorter lives, less divine presence, firmer boundaries. Into this context, at the very end of the antediluvian period, came the Watchers according to Enochic chronology. They descended during the days of Jared in the 10th generation, when the last antediluvian kings were ruling, when the corruption was reaching its peak. They saw the daughters of men were beautiful and desired them. They swore their binding oath on Mount Hermon and descended. They took human wives, produced Nephilim giants, taught forbidden knowledge. The weapons they revealed led to violence. The cosmetics they taught led to vanity and sexual sin. The astronomical knowledge they imparted encouraged humans to read divine secrets in the stars. Their giant offspring consumed everything and filled the earth with bloodshed. The cries of suffering humanity reached heaven. The archangels reported to God. Judgment was decreed. Gabriel was sent to destroy the giants. Raphael bound Azazel in darkness. Michael imprisoned Shemhazer and the other Watchers. Uriel warned Noah of the coming flood. The earth was cleansed, the corruption purged, the world restarted. The Watchers' descent wasn't the beginning of divine-human interaction, but its culmination and crisis. The framework was already established. The cosmos had been organized, humanity created, civilization founded, cities built, knowledge revealed. The Apkallu had already crossed boundaries, taught arts and sciences, possibly produced hybrids. The antediluvian world was already characterized by divine beings teaching humanity, kings ruling for impossibly long periods, a complex relationship between heaven and earth. The Watchers represented the extreme point of these patterns, the final and most egregious boundary violation, the transgression that made the existing order completely unsustainable and necessitated its destruction through flood. Or, in the less morally judgmental Mesopotamian framing, they were part of the broader complex of factors that led to humanity becoming so numerous and noisy that cosmic reset became necessary. After the flood, both traditions agree the world was different. The boundaries between heaven and earth were more firmly established. Direct divine presence on earth was more limited. Lifespans were shorter, hybrid beings were gone, the age of wonders was over. Humanity had to develop with mortal limitations without supernatural tutors in a world diminished from what it had been. Yet the memory persisted, preserved in these ancient texts we've explored tonight. The Enuma Elish with its cosmic creation through divine combat. The Eridu Genesis with its cities founded by divine decree. The Sumerian king list with its impossibly long-reigned monarchs. The Atrahasis epic with its explanation of human purpose and divine motivation for the flood. The traditions about the Apkallu and their comprehensive teaching of civilization. These texts give us the framework for understanding what the Book of Enoch and Genesis preserve in different form. Memory of a primordial age when divine and human interacted more directly, when knowledge was revealed. From heaven, when boundaries were crossable, when the world was younger and stranger than anything we know now. The Mesopotamians preserved these memories in cuneiform on clay tablets, copied generation after generation, millennium after millennium. The Jews transformed them into Hebrew scripture and apocalyptic literature, adapting ancient Near Eastern narrative patterns to monotheistic theology. Both traditions witness to a belief that we are not the first, that before our world there were other arrangements, other possibilities, that something went catastrophically wrong, requiring destruction and new beginning. Whether these stories preserve actual historical memory, encode ancient astronomical or mathematical knowledge, express archetypal psychological truths, or serve purely theological and mythological functions, they shaped how ancient peoples understood their place in the cosmos, their relationship to the divine, and the trajectory of human existence from origins to present to future. The Sumerian texts, as humanity's oldest written records, give us the foundation. They show us what the ancient Mesopotamians believed about the time before the flood, about how cosmos emerged from chaos, about why humanity exists, about where civilization came from, about what role divine beings played in early human development, about what went wrong that required cosmic reset. They reveal a world in transition from primordial chaos to organized cosmos, from formless potentiality to structured reality, from divine monopoly to divine human cooperation, from barbarism to civilization. They show us gods who are powerful but not omnipotent, who need humanity's service, who make mistakes and have regrets, who disagree among themselves and negotiate cosmic decisions. They preserve traditions about divine sages who taught everything from writing to magic, whose knowledge transformed primitive humans into civilized beings capable of serving the gods and maintaining the cosmos. They document the belief that kingship descended from heaven, that the first cities were founded by divine command, that the antediluvian age was fundamentally different from our own. And they provide the context within which to understand later traditions about watchers, fallen angels, Nephilim giants, and the flood that destroyed the antediluvian world. The Enochic tradition represents a Jewish interpretation of widespread ancient Near Eastern memories, transforming ambiguous Mesopotamian culture heroes into clearly evil fallen angels, turning boundary-crossing divine teachers into rebellious corruptors. But both preserve the essential pattern: divine beings descending to earth before the flood, teaching humanity various arts and sciences, crossing boundaries between realms, producing problematic outcomes, facing judgment and removal. Both traditions witness to a belief that the antediluvian world operated under different rules, that direct divine-human interaction characterized that age, that something went catastrophically wrong, requiring destruction and new beginning. Tonight we've traced these ancient memories from their oldest written forms in Sumerian cuneiform through their Babylonian elaborations to their transformation in Jewish apocalyptic literature. We've seen how the Apkallu traditions might have influenced the development of the Watcher's narrative, how the antediluvian kings relate to the long-lived patriarchs, how the Mesopotamian flood story shaped the biblical account. We've explored what these texts reveal about the world before the Watchers: a cosmos, organized from primordial chaos, gods born from waters, humanity created to serve, civilization taught by divine sages, cities founded by heavenly decree, kings ruling for millennia, knowledge revealed from above, boundaries crossed between realms, an age both wondrous and terrifying, operating under different rules than our own. This primordial age ended with the flood. The antediluvian world was destroyed. The long-lived kings passed. The Apkallu were banished. The Watchers were bound. The giants were killed. The boundaries between heaven and earth were more firmly established. Humanity continued in a diminished world, mortal and limited, cut off from direct divine presence, having to work out existence with less help and more constraints. But we remember. In texts carved in clay 4,000 years ago, in biblical narratives composed millennia later, in apocalyptic visions of the Hellenistic period, in myths from cultures worldwide. We remember a time when gods walked among mortals, when divine beings taught civilization, when existence was different, when we were more and the gods were nearer. These Sumerian texts have given us their testimony about what happened before the Watchers came to Earth. They've shown us the framework that was already in place, the stage upon which the drama would unfold, the patterns already established that the Watchers would take to their extreme and unsustainable conclusion. They've revealed a primordial age of wonders that ended in judgment and new beginning, an age we can barely imagine, but that shaped everything that came after. Thank you for joining me on this journey through humanity's oldest written memories tonight. Before you go, if you found this exploration worthwhile, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into ancient mysteries and forgotten histories. Leave a comment telling me which aspect intrigued you most, whether the cosmic creation from Tiamat's corpse, the Apkallu teaching civilization, the impossibly long-reigned antediluvian kings, or the connections between Mesopotamian and Jewish traditions. These ancient voices from Sumer and Babylon speak to us across 4 millennia, preserved in clay, telling us about a world before our world, an age before our age. They remind us that human civilization is deeper and stranger than we. Often remember that our ancestors grappled with the same fundamental questions we still ask about origins: meaning, purpose, and our relationship to the divine. The texts are fragmentary, the interpretations debated, the historical accuracy uncertain. But the power of these ancient narratives persists, speaking to something deep in human experience, resonating across cultures and millennia, drawing us back to these oldest stories, seeking understanding of that mysterious age when the world was young and the boundaries between heaven and earth were not yet firmly drawn. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truths hidden in the forgotten corners of ancient history. The Sumerian texts have given us their testimony. May we carry that ancient wisdom forward, remembering that we stand on foundations laid in an age we can barely imagine, inheritors of knowledge transmitted across hundreds of generations, links in a chain stretching back to civilization's dawn itself. The question of what these ancient texts truly preserve remains one of the most fascinating mysteries in archaeology and religious studies. Are they purely mythological constructs, created to explain the origins of civilization and provide theological frameworks for understanding human existence? Are they distorted memories of actual historical events, perhaps migrations of advanced peoples, catastrophic natural disasters, or the rise of early kingdoms? Or do they preserve some deeper truth about the nature of reality, the relationship between divine and human, the structure of consciousness itself? Modern archaeology gives us physical evidence that both supports and complicates these ancient narratives. Excavations at sites like Eridu have confirmed extraordinary antiquity, with occupation layers stretching back over 7,000 years. The development of civilization in southern Mesopotamia happened largely as the texts describe: first small settlements, then growing, towns, eventually great cities with monumental architecture, all dependent on sophisticated irrigation agriculture in an otherwise arid landscape. Evidence of catastrophic flooding appears in multiple Mesopotamian sites. At Shuruppak, where Ziusudra allegedly ruled as the last antediluvian king, archaeologists found a layer of water-deposited sediments separating earlier occupation from later rebuilding, radiocarbon dated to around 2900 BCE. Similar flood layers appear at Uruk and Kish from roughly the same period. Were these the basis for flood traditions that grew into cosmic mythology? But these weren't global floods destroying all civilization. They were regional disasters, devastating but survivable, requiring rebuilding but not cosmic reset. The mythological elaboration came later, transforming historical floods into theological statements about divine judgment, human corruption, and the transition between ages. The remarkable achievements of early Mesopotamian civilization are undeniable. The invention of writing around 3200 BCE revolutionized human society, allowing information to be preserved, transmitted, accumulated across generations. The development of mathematics, including the sexagesimal system we still use for measuring time and angles, enabled astronomy, architecture, administration, trade. The wheel, the plough, sailboats, bronze metallurgy all emerged in this region during the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. Did this represent human ingenuity developing independently, or does it preserve memory of knowledge transmitted from some external source, whether divine teachers, advanced predecessors, or lost civilizations? The texts claim divine revelation. Modern scholarship emphasizes human innovation. Perhaps both perspectives capture part of the truth. Innovation requires inspiration, and ancient peoples attributed their inspirations to divine sources. The parallels between Mesopotamian and biblical traditions cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The flood narratives are too similar in structure and detail. The long-lived antediluvian figures appear in both traditions. The seventh figure receiving special revelation appears in both. The pattern of declining lifespans after the flood appears in both. The concept of divine beings teaching humanity appears in both, though framed very differently theologically. These parallels emerged because Jews lived in Mesopotamia during the Babylonian exile, were exposed to these traditions, and incorporated elements while transforming them to fit monotheistic theology. This isn't diminishing the biblical texts, but recognizing them as products of ancient Near Eastern culture, sharing common mythological patterns while offering unique theological interpretations. The Book of Enoch, written much later during the Hellenistic period, when Jewish thought was interacting with Greek philosophy and facing the crisis of Seleucid persecution, represents further development of these traditions. The Watcher's narrative elaborates Genesis 6:1-4, using familiar ancient Near Eastern patterns of divine descent, forbidden knowledge, hybrid offspring, and flood judgment, but transforming them into an apocalyptic vision of cosmic conflict between good and evil, faithful and rebellious angels, God's people and their oppressors. Understanding the Mesopotamian background enriches our reading of both Genesis and Enoch. We see them not as isolated revelations, but as part of ongoing ancient conversations about origins, purpose, divine human relationships, and the meaning of suffering and judgment. The Sumerian texts give us the foundation, the earliest written expressions of these themes that would echo through millennia of religious thought. What happened before the Watchers came to Earth? According to these ancient texts, everything. The entire framework of creation, civilization, divine human relationship was established during the antediluvian period. The cosmos was organized from chaos. Humanity was created to serve the gods. Cities were founded by divine decree. Knowledge was revealed by supernatural teachers. Kings ruled for impossibly long spans. An age of wonders and terrors preceded our diminished present. The Watchers entered this already ancient world at its climax and crisis. They represented the extreme point of patterns already in motion, the final boundary violation that made the existing order unsustainable. Their descent, teaching, interbreeding, and the violence of their offspring became the catalyst for judgment, but the framework for their actions was established long before they arrived. After the flood, the world began again, but differently. The patterns of the antediluvian age couldn't be fully restored. The direct presence of divine beings was limited. The extraordinary lifespans declined. The boundaries between realms were firmer. Humanity had to develop with mortal limitations, without supernatural tutors, walking openly among us in a world diminished from primordial glory. Yet the memory persisted, transmitted through texts, rituals, traditions, shaping how ancient peoples understood themselves and their world. The Sumerians preserved it in cuneiform on clay, the oldest writing humanity produced. The Babylonians elaborated it in their creation epics and flood narratives. The Jews transformed it into scripture and apocalypse. The Christians inherited and reinterpreted it. The Muslims incorporated elements into their own revelation. These ancient memories continue to fascinate, to provoke questions, to inspire speculation and research. They remind us that human civilization is far older than we often realize, that our ancestors grappled with profound questions, that the relationship between divine and human has been contested and negotiated across millennia, that what we take for granted about the structure of reality may be only one possibility among many that have been imagined, believed, and perhaps even experienced. The Sumerian texts have given us their testimony. 4,000 years after they were first pressed into wet clay, we can still read them, still hear those ancient voices speaking about gods and humans, creation and destruction, knowledge and transgression, judgment and mercy, the old world and the new. They connect us to the deepest roots of human civilization, to the very dawn of writing and recorded thought, to the moment when humanity first began putting its memories and beliefs into permanent form. May we continue to study these ancient voices, to learn from them while recognizing their cultural and temporal distance from us, to appreciate both their wisdom and their limitations, to carry forward the best of what they teach, while transcending the boundaries they couldn't cross. The conversation continues, and we are privileged to participate in it, standing on foundations laid millennia ago, looking back with gratitude and forward with hope. Tonight's exploration has taken us through layers of ancient thought and tradition, from the primordial chaos before creation through the organized cosmos Marduk established, from the creation of humanity to serve divine needs through the founding of the first cities, from the teaching of the Apkallu sages through the corruption that led to the flood, and finally to the connections between these Mesopotamian traditions and the later Jewish apocalyptic literature about Watchers and Nephilim. We've seen how the Enuma Elish describes cosmic organization through divine combat, how Tiamat's defeated body became the raw material for heaven and earth, how king's blood mixed with clay became humanity. We've examined the purpose Mesopotamian theology assigned to human existence. We are servants created to relieve the gods of labor, to maintain temples and provide offerings, to keep the cosmos functioning smoothly. We've explored the Eridu Genesis and its account of the first cities founded by divine decree, each with its patron deity, each contributing to the overall structure of antediluvian civilization. We've studied the Sumerian king list with its 8 antediluvian monarchs, ruling for a combined 241,200 years, numbers that challenge modern understanding but that the Sumerians preserved for thousands of years as legitimate historical records. We've met the 7 Apkallu, those fish-garbed sages who emerged from the cosmic ocean to teach humanity everything necessary for civilization, from writing and mathematics to agriculture and astronomy, from metalworking and architecture to law and divination. We've traced hints that they eventually transgressed boundaries, taught forbidden knowledge, possibly produced hybrid offspring, and faced banishment by Marduk back to the Abzu from which they came. We've examined the Atrahasis epic and its explanation for why the gods sent the flood. Humanity had become too numerous and too noisy, disturbing Enlil's rest, to the point where he demanded drastic action. We've followed Enki's clever circumvention of the divine oath not to warn humanity, speaking to the wall so Ziusudra would hear and build the boat that preserved life through the catastrophe. We've analysed the connections between these Mesopotamian traditions and the Book of Enoch, seeing how the Apkallu might have influenced the development of the Watcher's narrative, how divine beings teaching humanity appears in both traditions though framed very differently, how the pattern of descent, teaching, transgression, hybrid offspring, and judgment echoes across both cultures despite the theological gulf between polytheism and monotheism. We've traced the 7th figure parallel between Enmendur Anna, Enmeduranki, and Enoch, both 7th in their lineages, both receiving special divine revelation, both associated with hidden knowledge, both taken to heaven, both founding traditions of sacred learning. The specificity of these parallels points to cultural transmission rather than coincidence. We've understood why the biblical and Enochic traditions transformed the Apkallu into watchers, changing beneficent culture bearers into rebellious fallen angels, turning divine service into cosmic transgression, reinterpreting boundary-crossing divine teachers as corrupters who revealed forbidden knowledge and violated natural order. The transformation reflects the shift from polytheistic to monotheistic frameworks, from competing divine wills to unified divine law. Through it all, we've maintained focus on what these texts reveal about the antediluvian world, the age before the Watchers, the primordial time when the foundations of everything we know were being laid. This was an age characterized by direct divine-human interaction, by revelation of knowledge from heaven, by boundary crossing between realms, by extraordinary longevity, by divine beings walking visibly on earth, by a permeability between heaven and earth that would later be closed. The Watchers' descent happened at the end of this age, not its beginning. They entered a world already ancient, already characterized by a divine-human interaction through the Apkallu, already developing the corruption that would necessitate cosmic reset. Their transgression represented the culmination of existing patterns, the extreme point of boundary violations already occurring, the final element that made the antediluvian order completely unsustainable. After the flood, both Mesopotamian and biblical traditions agree the world changed fundamentally. Boundaries between heaven and earth were more firmly established. Direct divine presence was limited. Lifespans declined progressively. Hybrid beings disappeared. The Age of Wonders ended. Humanity continued in a diminished world, mortal and limited, separated from the intimate divine contact that characterized earlier ages. Yet we remember. The memories persisted in texts copied across millennia, in traditions transmitted through generations, in myths that resonated across cultures. The Sumerians remembered in cuneiform on clay. The Babylonians elaborated in their epics. The Jews transformed into scripture and apocalypse. The memories shaped how ancient peoples understood their origins, their purpose, their relationship to the divine, their place in cosmic history. These texts from ancient Mesopotamia, the oldest written records humanity produced, give us access to these primordial memories in their earliest forms. They show us what the cradle of civilization believed about the time before the flood, about cosmic origins, about divine-human relationships, about the foundations of civilization itself. They reveal a worldview where gods were active, visible, engaged with humanity, where the supernatural wasn't separate from the natural, but different aspects of unified reality. They preserve traditions about an age we can barely imagine, when existence operated under different rules, when the possible was broader, when divine beings taught civilization, when kings ruled for millennia, when boundaries we take for granted were permeable. Whether these traditions preserve actual historical memory, encode lost knowledge, express archetypal truths, or serve purely theological functions, they shaped human civilization for thousands of years and continue to fascinate us today. The question of what happened before the Watchers came to Earth has been answered. According to these ancient texts, nearly everything. The comprehensive framework of creation, civilization, knowledge, and divine human relationship was established during the vast antediluvian age. The Watchers entered late in this age, taking existing patterns to unsustainable extremes, catalyzing the judgment that would destroy the old world and require everything to begin again, under new, more limited conditions. We stand now in the world that emerged from that catastrophe, the post-diluvian world where direct divine presence is rare, where lifespans are brief, where boundaries between realms are firm, where we must work out our existence with mortal limitations. But the memory remains, calling to us from clay tablets pressed 4,000 years ago, reminding us that it wasn't always so, that once the world was different, that perhaps someday it might be different again. This has been our journey tonight through the oldest written memories of the primordial age. Thank you for your attention, your patience, and your willingness to explore these ancient voices with me. The conversation continues, echoing across millennia, connecting us to the deepest roots of human thought and belief. May we carry it forward with wisdom, humility, and wonder at the profound questions our ancestors asked and the remarkable answers they preserve for us in the enduring medium of clay and cuneiform script.